Hey, real quick before we get into this video, I don't know why, but Russell and Jonas's audio gets a little bit messed up during the first couple minutes. I promise it corrects itself. I don't know how it happened, and I don't know how it corrects itself, but it's just going to be for the first couple minutes. It's not the entire video, so I'm sorry that happened, but I really did enjoy doing this with them. We're planning on doing these about once a month moving forward, so this is the July version, and if there's anything else you guys want for the next couple ones, let us know, but I hope you guys enjoy it, and again, sorry for the audio issue in the first couple minutes. Hey everyone, Egman here with another video, and I'm joined with two handsome boys. We've got Yonas and Russell here with the first of many team talks for Egman events, and both these players are fantastic. I really appreciate both of them being here. Russell in particular, who's missing out on some pre-release action to be here, which I appreciate. So, but we wanted to do kind of not anything too regular, probably every 4 weeks or so, but just kind of a discussion of our thoughts on like certain metas, maybe before big events. Maybe we know that we're getting like a restriction list sometime next month announced kind of thing. So just kind of where our thoughts are going into some of these kind of pivotal points. So Jonas, why don't you just, I mean, if people don't know who you are, just in case, go for it real quick.
Oh. Hello, my name is Yonas Abraham, Yonas OPTCG on Twitter. I am luckily North America's first One Piece national champion, which is super awesome. And I currently do a lot of One Piece coaching and content creation right now. I'm jumping into it, so yeah, it's super fun to make this kind of a huge part of my life. And One Piece is great. You guys haven't figured that out already.
Oh, 100%. It's really signing looking like to be like the summer of One Piece content. I think too. I think a lot of people are jumping into it, so it's a really, really good time for that. And we also have Russell, which is hard to follow from North American champion, but you've got a whole bunch of accomplishments in One Piece as well.
Yeah, I don't remember how many times I've done it. I serious.
Yeah, cool. You did it.
I went X3 nationals, and I got bodied in soccer juniors, and I've been playing like Star Wars, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh versus system. And then Digimon, and I had a decent amount of accomplishments in there for the time. Yeah. So I'm more broad, but I didn't win national.
No. No one else has won nationals like Yonas, so you're fine. You're in that same group there. So, but yet, all right.
Yo, imagine
that'd be amazing.
Hey, you've got twice as many chances this year, so you can try it for sure. So, we do have it's kind of a weird month because I think we've been talking like OPO7's a really, really fun and open meta. But outside of the store championships, we really don't have anything until August, which I also think is some people are testing some really crazy things and they're trying to hide it respectfully before then, which I totally understand. But I think this is a really, I don't know. They're just every day I'm like, why don't I test this, or why I haven't tested this in a while? And there's a bunch of crazy things you can do right now.
Yep. Yeah. This format's the Wild West right now, and a lot of people are just exploring because there haven't been any events. There's like one Oceania event from last weekend, and aside from that, it's just whatever we're testing at locals, which is fun from a deck building perspective, but definitely confusing for a lot of people that are trying to prepare for upcoming events.
Yeah, I think also that since Sokka has been dominating the meta for so long, and since onboard removal was so easy for that color to have against every other color in the game. It's now like everyone else's time to go through weird, fun, wacky ideas and or new colors that are clearly established themselves either in the East or like just in general before Sokka was around. And then now they get to go back and revisit them. So it's fun that it's the Wild Wild West. I think that supports everything we've already talked about, which is more content, more ideas, more times like to actually value tech. And then it's more opportunities than ever for great players to make really good meta calls and have that reflected in their game planning and their deck lists.
Yeah.
So it's
I would agree.
If you're a One Piece fan, this format's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's pretty fire.
Yeah. I would say quickly, this is a format where I can play a 3-drop and it sometimes survives a turn, which hasn't happened in a long, long time. Like just to be like, and that's why like Red Purple Law, they've been playing like the 3-drop Zoro Juro because there's a good chance it just survives an entire turn without you gets its when attacking effect. And yeah, I think it's very interesting. I also think like most decks have at least one hard counter too, right? Compared to maybe last format where if you were in one of the best decks, you have like maybe a 45-55 not in your favor, but there are a lot of decks that have at least like one like really bad matchup, which makes deck building a bit tricky as well.
100%. It's also a really fun constraint for me as a deck builder. People love to build their deck like, oh, I can have chances against everyone. And for me, I'm like, all right, if I play Lucci into Black Yellow Luffy, I'm gonna call it a day. I'm not gonna try to fix that matchup.
Yeah,
and that's a decision that some people have to make, and it's a really interesting deck building philosophy you have to approach this game with now.
Yeah, I think taking that whether or not you're gonna accept the auto loss and or tech for it, and then if people are actually dedicating time and testing, they know that said tech is coming. I guess one of the most discussed ones right now is like 10-drop Kuzan inside Black Yellow Luffy. It's like, is my opponent even playing that in their list?
Yeah.
And that's what people get to start thinking about now come every like matchup they run into.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm supposed to starve them and do nothing. And they drop a 10-drop Kuzan. You're like, all right, I wasn't prepped for that. I'm aware that people might play it.
Yeah.
But I wasn't prepared for you to play it on me right
now.
So it's fun to see.
Yeah, it really is like I can't really think of a time since release where we can run just so many different techs. I mean, the card pool is so large. There's so many like different like tiny 1-ofs and 2-ofs that can hard counter something that if you really want to kind of get like a sneaky play off. So 10-drop Kuzan I think is like that for sure. And most decks kind of have those cards that if they're playing something funky that's not in the typical 50, they can get a lot of free advantage.
Yep.
So cool.
Yeah, talk about some future fun tech soon.
Yes. So, which again, like was why I was mentioning, like, yeah, some people they want to keep their secret safe, right? They want to be able to get their their regional invite, and they can be like, yes, of course, I ran this card. This is the play for it. But but we're real quick for this one. We're going to go over my previous tier list that I had, which was about 2 weeks ago. We'll go over there real quick. And so this is where I was at when I made the video right at release. And I've made some changes with it and done some good testing to change it. But I still think like the big thing for it is that what are the 5 best decks in the format? I said it was Enel, Red Purple Law, Rob Lucci, Black Yellow Luffy, and Bonney. And I think that's still probably the same, maybe not in that order. But where's the top 5 in yours, Yonas? Is there one that you'd put up or put down?
I think the top 5 is those 5. I think it's pretty clear in that respect. I think the 2 decks you can try to put as the 6th are Moria and Perona, but I think those are still a fair amount worse. But I think the 5 decks you'd expect to play the most in the first couple of weeks of OPO7 are definitely those 5. And I don't really know which deck will be more popular than the other. Some people just like to play their Bonney deck or their Lucci deck, and some people want to play Enel, myself included.
Yes, of course. Which we'll go over your. As of right now, like between recording this and releasing this, I have no doubt your list will change. But this is your list at one time, 100%. So
100%. Yep.
What do you think?
Nell is absolutely not number 1.
Okay.
Oh, how dare you!
That's the back of the car. I mean, I put Lucci and Law in my own mental tier list above the rest of them because when they high roll, it's rough. For most lists they handle, except for obviously the auto loss or the bad matchup that you take amongst this other like top 7. I personally would actually put Perona below Boa, so I think that's not bad the way you have it currently set up. I think Moria's there to be alongside consistent players that just want a consistent deck that's not Enel, and that would be Black Yellow Luffy or Bonney. And I don't think Perona can get the job done against players who are like well tested against it, which was proven wrong. I've always felt that way. What was it, last week or 2 weeks ago? Perona already won last weekend.
Yeah. And that was in 1.5, right? So it was again like another Wild West kind of thing, but 100%. Like it's I don't know. I've done a lot of Perona testing since and then, And really, my kind of mantra for it is that if you play more Gekomoris, you win anyways. So I think Perona has some ways to kind of set up some times to see more of it, and we can talk about Perona a little bit later. And just I think decks that can play 8-drop Gekomoria, but I think that's if I was to change the top list from there, I think Rob Lucci might be, if not the best, I think it's the most popular leader right now. That's the one that I see when I've been testing exponentially more than everyone else. Like even today, like when I was testing today, I saw it like 4 in a row, which I've never seen any other leader 4 times in a row. Like it's very very present.
Yep, I do think it's definitely the most popular deck right now. I think it's largely a product of how many options you have to build that deck.
Yeah,
there's just so many cards to choose to build. When I was first getting all the cards for Lucci to build on Sim, I think I grabbed like 120 cards and just like put 4 of those on the page and slowly started clicking cards off of it. You have so many different cards you can potentially choose from.
Yeah.
So, getting those hours in, getting those reps in, trying to figure out which one the best 50 are is probably going to take a long time for people to master.
Yeah, and I think that's something else for this format. I don't think we've really said this outright, but Japan had this format, but just not for very long. And for as long as they did have it, they didn't have like a lot of events. So like when Sakazuki came to North America in OPO5, it had already been like tried and tested, and people knew what a good 50 for that looked like, right? But for the first couple of weeks in Japan, it wasn't topping. It wasn't. People didn't know what the ratio was. And Sakazuki, if you have like a bad ratio, it's pretty. Like if you are leaning too much for removal or too much to reduction, the list looks a little bad sometimes, right? Like you do need like a pretty good formula for success with that leader.
Yeah. As I from set 1, set 2 have been avidly following the Thailand and the Malaysian scene. And they had 2 big tournaments in the OPO7 setting, and I used a lot of their lists and how their tournaments went as like a template for what I usually like think to build off of, especially since I believe Japan might have straight up skipped 07. I don't remember seeing a single tournament from there, but 2 of my favorite players from Malaysia and Thailand also performed with different leaders that I want to try, which was Bonney, Lucci, and Moria. And so for the most part, I'm like, oh well, they definitely grinded. They definitely come out with like some great tech. As we've known for quite some time, outside of like Sakazuki, we sometimes have a lot of different metas over here in the West, and so it's like, oh okay, well American players like playing this, and so we're gonna add like this tech instead, like sheep, soap sheep.
Yeah.
Like a couple of other like small things I can get added in. So
makes sense.
Yeah, I think that we do have, I don't know, like there's like the locals mentality, but compared to a lot of other games and stuff, like locals get pretty big in the United States. Like you'll have like 40, 50 person locals. Like in Arizona, we have that too. And so there can be like those like zip code mentalities where like, oh, well, there just so happens to be so many people who are on Bonney right now. And so obviously it wins just by numbers. But if if you're playing a deck that has like a minor bad matchup into it, you're like, Bonney seems really, really good all of a sudden, right? Or there's just like without a lot of like unifying like large results in big tournaments for this month, it is going to be a lot more up in the air than we're used to, which I think is fun. Because there's just been so many times where like by week 2 of a format, I'm like, all right, these are clearly the best decks. Here's the 48 out of 50 card build for it, and do with that as you will for the next 2 months. So
yeah, I think it's good is like if you are like if your experience in tournaments is pretty much only locals, and then now you're about to go to Gen Con or you're about to go into like these big events, having that mindset of understanding that things will be different than your locals, and or a matchup you might have played against at your locals, with whether it was a strong player, weaker player, whatever, they will have different tech and they will have different game plans ready for you. And I think that's like the biggest thing I'm offering advice to people when they're like, oh, like I played against Bonney. Bonney seems free. And I was like, all right, well, as a Bonney player, here's my game plan. What is your game plan going like, into this matchup? And that has like led to very, very solid discussion. So I think no matter what deck you're playing and what you're building, understanding that you need to sometimes leave your little bubble of information and go and seek others out there, which is why things like content creation, coaching service, and all that are so valuable, because it's different insight that's not secluded to the ones that you're used to seeing around you, and or for players that you already respect.
Yeah.
Like maybe the best player to locals is saying like, this is X, Y, and Z. And so you follow that to a T. They themselves could possibly be wrong, or they themselves may not have like tested the particular tech, and it's like up to you to digest the information they provided to you and then have your own outlook and insight into it. So
yeah,
hopefully stuff like this and the content that Eggman's making and all that helps everyone jog a couple more brain cells.
Yes.
And then
I hope it's going to be a very weird month of tournament results for me. It's either I'm going to get like a dozen different store championships, or I'm going to get 0 of them, and they're grindy, but like since it's a lottery system for the store championships too, there's no like hierarchy of who's actually in the tournaments, right? It is generally a good mix of a lot of different skill levels and a lot of different players. So I there's just a bunch of variety inside of that, just because of who's actually able to play in those too. Yep.
Sometimes you have like a Chris Sock in your tournament, and sometimes it's just a bunch of people that we haven't seen much in these online tournaments. So there's gonna be a bunch of different people with different takes on a different decks. Yeah. So we're gonna have a lot of new data, which will be really fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one more thing to touch on before we maybe jump in, but a lot of decks, even when they're the same leader, there's room for personalization in your own tech choices, which I think is a strength of a really strong meta, where you get to make these decisions when deck building of like, what do I want to do well against, what am I conceding against, and it makes it really interesting from where it was, because again, like there's been so many soccer lists, like the biggest like new ad was what, the Navy HQ, and like that took 2 slots, and you like rearranged a couple of cards, right? Like Brook got added towards EBO1, but it wasn't even like a thing of like decision making. Most of the time it was like people like straight up just went to the new deck, and then it's again those 48 out of 50. But like you'll see people play Bonney lists, and there are some staples, but then there's different techs between them. Or anything outside of like Black Yellow Luffy, I think is the only deck that's really 50 out of 50 at times, and maybe Gecko Moria, because you have to run so much of your Thriller Bark. But you will see different players play different ways with different tech cards, and I think that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty neat.
Yeah. So, cool. Well, we'll go over some decks as well. But any big changes from this tier list, though? Anything that I didn't mention, or you would say like, oh, how dare you put Yamato in playable? It is way better than that.
I do think Nami and Yamato are like definitely on a cusp between competitive and playable. But other than that, I think you got it pretty close to spot on. I mean, rankings between or within the same tier is obviously debatable, but in terms of the buckets, I think it's pretty close to spot on.
Yeah, I just agree.
Okay.
I mean,
it
just depends if you're going to take it on like a competitive level, or like all the arguments I have are like is playable to unlikely. Or untested. Yeah. I'm just like, all right, well that's definitely playable. That's fire. However, would I leave that deck up for a tournament I'm taking seriously? No. So it's like, there's not much.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll keep you on the team. You can disagree with me. You don't have to be like, yes, sir. Like,
no. I've already brought up Enel should not be that top spot.
Yeah.
Take that back.
I will let you. Okay, well, two quick things I want to say. Yonas and I were talking about Nami. Nami probably needs to be bumped up. It's probably top 10 leaders, because if we're playing, I think this is like one of, if not the slowest meta that we've had in this card game, and because of that, I think Nami can really take advantage of it. So I think it's where it used to be like it would top. I would say it would consistently top like a top 32 kind of spot. I think it'd be like 1 or 2 spots in the top 16 more consistently in this meta. Or at least people will have to like respect it as something that they need to know how to play against effectively. And the other one, I was going to say Gecko Moria. I think a lot of people jump ship to Rob Lucci because it was the new deck kind of thing. Do you guys both think that Rob Lucci is consistently better than Moria, or what? Any talk or thoughts between those two?
I think Moria is a more proactive deck than Lucci. I guess to do a lot more things with the Thriller Bark thing or engine. You got to play a lot more like just like Moria, bring back Hog back, just get some extra cards that way.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more intrinsic card advantage in Moria. But obviously Lucci is the way better deck at KOing boards. So like Tempest Kicks, Lucci's, 6-8 cost Sabo, all that stuff really adds up. So if the meta is very hostile to like KO effects, if there's like a bunch of 7-cost Enels, like a bunch of Basil Hawkins, Lucci tends to be a little bit worse. But when that happens, like just playing Moria and just like Peroning your opponent tends to be a lot better. So they kind of have different axes on which they kind of compete, but they're both powerful black decks and they both have access to both KO and card disruption. So I think they both have their pros and cons.
Yeah, I think Lucci just has the higher ceiling of ability to high roll, and like you high roll Moria, like you're kind of chilling. You high roll Lucci, like going second, hitting stage, drawing everything you need, 3 Tempest Kicks with like 13 cards in discard pile. Like you're kind of vibing no matter what. However, I personally would sleeve up Moria for a tournament than I would Lucci, because I love the consistency that it provides through having that mill. And I can only think of how many times I've topped with Moria and just been like, wow, my opening hand's garbage, and I milled the 2 top perfect cards I needed. Just like Perona Hogback. And then the next turn I milled a Moria, and I was like, hey, this deck's fire. But, other than that, I don't know. It's more, it's consistent. And it's just the same thing. It's Lucci just... You draw hot.
You just can't lose.
It's also like it's been so many games and months of Moria. Like it's cool to try out new leaders that do something very, very close to what the other deck does. It's cool.
I would just say, to wrap it up, I think if you like Moria more, you can 100% play it, and don't tell people, like, if you play Moria, I'm sure in the next, and I think I'm guilty of saying this too, is like, your opponent will be like, why? Why aren't you playing Rob Lucci? Do you not get the cards or something? But I think it's something that's very viable. I think people did, jump to the newer deck, but it's still something that's going to be really present. And if Rob Lucci does better, I think it will be more leaning on just the quantity of people taking the deck than necessarily it being that much better than Moria, if it's not just even kind of thing. So it's going to be interesting. I had a 64-person tournament. It was in the finals. So I think Moria is still very viable in a lot of ways. And the only thing that it got hit by is like maybe yellow black Luffy being a little bit more present, but Rob Lucci kind of has that same issue with that deck at times. So
they both have trouble against Sabos.
So cool. Anyways, I'm done with that spiel. We'll go to our deck list that we brought for today. But I think like the wrap up is that there's clearly winners for what's in this meta. But if you are really like believe in a deck, I think there's a chance and an opportunity for you to figure out what it looks like in this meta and take it really, really far. So we're going to go over some deck lists. All the deck lists that we're talking about today and others will be found on the Egman Events website too. So I'll have that linked in the description. We've been adding these a little bit throughout the last couple weeks with just builds that I've played on streams, or you guys have been like posting on Twitter, or I've just been talking about too. So we're trying to keep this pretty active, and you can find this too if you go and press the OP07 button at the top of the website. But we brought 3, I would say, again, of the standard decks, but we want to go over kind of our personal builds, and each one of these are from one of us. So we're going to start with Russell's current build of Bonney. And what's your kind of play style for playing Bonney, Russell?
You are a defensive deck that has offensive capabilities when you draw Hody Jones. In matchups that are meta relevant, you should have a game plan since the opening turn and since you're mulligan to look for those key pieces. And if you're playing Baby 5 and or Bonney, hopefully they're hitting the said key pieces that you want to play. I've seen most players find success with this deck if they had success playing green in set 1 and set 2. And because it's been quite a long time since green has been relevant in the game, that I see a lot of people making mistakes against the top end of what Bonney offers. And so I'm more than likely trying to sculpt the top end of my deck to fit the expected meta, which is what we're ending up here. So it's like my list, I have The 4 have typical everything. I don't play Baby 5. I play Rosinante because I see a lot more Luccis at my local meta than I do see anything else, and so I need to be able to play in Kid and then play in Rosinante the 2-drop.
Oh, 2-drop.
In order to see some play. Sorry, I didn't mean to like
no,
infer
you're
that
good.
way.
No,
but,
you're good.
I'm trying to do it too. And so then
I flipped the coin.
a lot of people are playing the 3-drop Bardo. Yeah, and I also played 3 of those for quite some time. I copy pasted the list that got first place at one of the tournaments over in the East, and then I made my own version of it. A list recently won the Philippines tournament. That player is a strong, I believe he is a Legends of Runeterra and Hearthstone player. So he comes with a different mentality that he explained quite a bit on Twitter. And then looking over his matchups for his list, it's very telling that they have a much different meta than what's expected in the rest of the East. And he ended up playing 4 8-drop Rosinantes and 4 Zoros. He had no 8-drop kids, no Dofis.
Wow.
He also had a list from when he was playing during OP07, and in that list he had 4 Zoros and then 3 8-drop Rosinantes that he said if he can look back now on, he would swap out the Rosinantes for Dofis. So I believe he found more value in Dofi in OP08 than he is doing Rosinante now. So with that said, I don't really have I can't sit here and say this is like the perfect list, and I don't think you should really listen to many that do in such a fashion. It's more like it's tailored to what the meta is going to be, and what you're expecting, and to like evaluate one of the lists. All you kind of want to do is really look like what is it trying to do? Is it trying to do too much, or is it doing too little for a particular matchup that it's sacrificing? And I found in most of my games at the end of the day, if I draw Hody Jones and 10-drop Dofi, I really don't care. Like how most of these, how many other cards go. If I'm able to find 2 Hody Jones against Red Purple Law, they more than likely lose. It just doesn't matter. And when you don't hit that, that's when you're relying on the other top end pieces of the deck in order to bail you out and or put you in scenarios where you can like mount a comeback. And that's when I started testing the 3 8-drop Rosies, and then I added in 2 extracts into the deck. And this deck is very greedy. Like this isn't a list for someone that wants to play extremely consistent and valued cards, like when you have Baby 5, when you swap all the 2K counters out for better ones, and that'll give you like a more than likely a better result into a vacuum. But what I'm doing here is I was getting really annoyed getting hands where I didn't see any of my top end, and I just wanted to start playing that more. We had a lot more Enel players and Black Yellow Luffy players pop up at my locals, and so I was like, oh, I'm going to add in another Zoro. I believe that the popularity of Bonney has gone up due to all the posts that we've seen like on Twitter and all discussion about it. So I was like, oh, I definitely need a second Zoro there. As of right now, I am only thinking about maybe swapping out another 8-drop Rosie into the 3rd kid, and then the Rosinantes can turn into the 3-drop Bardo that we discussed earlier. And you really only do the 3-drop Bardo because it has better value into Red Purple Law, and it's a blocker you can play off of 8-drop Kid. But the way that we discussed how like the slower meta, like the meta is slowing down in quite some time, that you kind of don't have many opportunities to tap your kid and then play out your blocker. And even when you do, you're pretty much already checkmating the board, where it didn't matter if it was a 2-drop Rosinante or a 3-drop Bardo in a lot of scenarios. And if it is 2-drop Rosinante into a Lucci, then it's much more impactful than the Bardo would be than the Bardo is. And again, that's why I am playing that over the other. I can make the argument that like if you just want to swap it out for Bardo, go ahead and do that. I've also found so many plays with the 8-drop Rosie into like almost every deck in the meta, where Red Purple Law has gotten too aggressive early at tons of counter power, and I was able to like 8-drop Rosie, then extract one of their cards, knowing that I'm still at like 3 or 4 life because I countered out against all early game swings. I've also had plays where 8-drop Rosie was able to bring in like a Cavendish against Lucci, and then Cavendish then got ultimate value when I was able to end with like stood up Dawn, so that way maybe they used Moria to play in a Rebecca and then made a Spandine play, but the swings that are coming out like that turn post Dofi would then get tapped down by like the leader ability. And if you counter out too early, you'll notice like you'll run out of a lot of counter power, and you don't value the cards on board as much as you should. And so you absolutely need your leader ability to be online a lot. So A Roach feels absolutely broken, and I need to test out the 3-drop next. The Dellinger.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. And that the one that restands one end phase, and to fit that into the list without me playing baby 5 sounds a little silly, and so I would have to sculpt almost everything of what I have here in order to start testing that out. But that is more of intended to be a going first version of the deck. And if you're taking like the play on 3-5-7-9, then you kind of want to play that a lot more. But I was getting sick of like fighting between using Bonney and using my baby 5. Or if I didn't see it turn 1 and I already have an erosion hand, when I draw Bonnies and baby 5s, I had a hard time getting value out of them or putting them on board outside of just having a 1K in my hand.
Mm-hmm.
And in those spots, like you usually don't have a top end plus a Cavendish. Like you're not going to have like both of those plus a Roach, top end and Cavendish. And it's not where you're like, all right, well, I'm 6. Now I can play Cavendish and start using my 1-drops, when really you just want to put a Basil Hawkins in play.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the biggest thing about this deck is people mess up their turn 5, 7, 8, and 9 and not properly mapping out what they need to establish a win condition against everything in the meta. And that is probably what my list is trying to do the most of by having so much top end. It's like I know what I need in what matchup and if I'm going first or I'm going second and the tempo of the matchup. And that's why I ended up with so many non-counter power cards.
Yeah.
That's the biggest argument that everyone can make. It's like, dude, you have so much non-counter power. And I was like, oh, I'm aware. Like, I know when I can take hits in a matchup, and I know when a kid's going to stick to the board, and I don't care how low I'm going to go on life because they're not going to, like, take the advantage the card advantage that I'm taking away from me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, like, I get in trouble sometimes with Bonney, like, well, I'm just going to play an 8-drop kid, and I'm just going to take all my life so I can defend it later. And that's a game-losing mentality sometimes for that. So
yeah.
I do agree. Like, since this is like a slower or like later meta, there are a lot of games where it's like, well, I saw more of my high end, so I had more of them on the board, so I win in the end. So it makes sense, like, why if that's what your game plan is, or Bonney is probably like naturally one of the most defensive leaders in this game, right? It gets out of essentially one extra attack every turn, right? For most decks, and because of that, I think you can afford to be a little bit greedier on your top end because it's so dependent on how you win your games.
Yeah, it's very hard to close against it. I think that's the biggest thing. Mm-hmm. Even against like some of like the good players on my locals, they would navigate where they don't know my hands has no counter power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course.
And
yeah,
they're like, there's no shot I'm going to get through this, even though I know that they could.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
I was like, oh, they have 3 swings, they can just go 9 plus this, and I just lose this game.
Mm-hmm.
But they're like, all right, well, he has 7 in hand, so I'm just not going to take that play.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where I come with the greed, and I think the matchup against RP Law is already rough in the first place, where you need to draw Hody Jones.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm willing to accept less counter power in such an aggressive matchup. That's kind of like why I tailored it this way. I'm of this like weird mathematical like mindset where I'm like, oh, I haven't seen the card yet, or it's like it's a green mirror match, and I know I want to draw Zoro. That I don't want to use a baby 5.
Yeah,
I haven't seen Zoro on my cards yet. Or like I played Bonney on turn 1 and I bought decked and I didn't see a Zoro in there. I was like, all right, well, I'm not playing Bonney. I'm not playing baby 5 because I need to draw the Zoro.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes it'll work out. Sometimes it's like, all right, the Zoro's at the bottom of the deck the whole time.
I think all 3 of us have that mentality. So you're among friends.
Perfect. Yeah. Awesome.
So yeah, no, there's 100% where like and I think you're right on baby 5 where like, well, what I really need is this card, and baby 5 can't find that card, and I don't want to bottom deck it. So I think that's super valid for that. And some of the consistent cards are helpful, but sometimes just like raw draw cards are also just really, really good. So
yeah. And I'm sure you guys might experience this like during coaching or just like in games in general and discussing with people. A lot of people assign rules to cards. Because this card has this effect, it must do this 24/7. And I think that's like when you get a good experienced player with a deck like green and they start breaking those rules that are publicly or accepted by the community, that you'll see like how much value you can get out of this deck behind a skillful player. Because like people will like they won't swing with blockers because they know they have to protect their kid, or Kid came down. It definitely has to turn sideways. It definitely has to have a Dawn attached for this turn. And those like small micro decisions that are made like make or break some matchups in this meta. And yeah, I think that this deck's just kind of it's hard to pilot for the most part. I would say it's one of the more like harder decks to play currently in the meta because you're not just counting like to 1 and 2. So like it's pretty rough and yeah, I know.
Yeah, I
want a third 0 cost too. That's like the other thing too. There's so many. I wish you could play 52 cards. This would be so easy.
I was looking at that. I want a third one too. But Yonas, what's your thoughts with Bonney in the list?
I think Bonney is the deck that tests your knowledge of combat probably the most in the game. Mm-hmm. All of us played in like OPO1, OPO2, and I think the OPO1 Kid Mirrors were probably one of the most skill-intensive things that you could play in this game to date. Mm-hmm. Just because you need to understand a lot about making sure when you should leave your characters rested, characters active, trying to apply a lot more pressure to your opponent, or just like make sure they can't be destroyed. And this deck is probably the most positional deck that has existed in a very long time. And understanding your role both at a macro perspective and from turn to turn is very rewarding when you're playing Bonney. So if you miss that kind of feeling, if you've played Kid in OPO1, or you just like playing these green decks that just like are just big beefy creatures trying to grind each other out, it's a fun time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it's frustrating because you're just like, is this worth one extra card in my hand, right? Like people will be thinking, and of course you'll have people standing around and like, just give them the 1K, right? And you're like, no, it's not that simple, I promise. Like it's there's a lot going on. So
yeah, and there's a lot of like matchups where you take like this defensive posture they're all game, mm-hmm. and then you hit like 7 or 8 Dawn, and then you're like, all right, aggressive time. You turn your entire board sideways and you throw out a Hody, mm-hmm. and then you just swing Hody and pass, and you have like no leader ability, and it interrupts your opponent's thinking because they were like, oh, well, they're just going defensive. I'm going to get this like Moria play. I'm going to do that. And then now that their mindset is so stuck in Moria, or they mapped out Moria game plans coming up, mm-hmm. that they don't get to attach Dawn to their characters and apply pressure to like my sideways X-Drake or my sideways Cavendish in a fashion that they would actually gain value out of. Mm-hmm. So, makes sense. Yeah. I love this deck. It actually kind of reinvigorated my enjoyment of playing One Piece a tad bit. So.
Get back into it.
Yeah.
Have you thought about playing more Pizza, the Bonney event, basically? Searches. Is it just like not really worth playing because there's too many bricks, or you just not really need the extra searchers?
No, it would just take the spot of the 8-drop Rosie and then 1-0.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
It's just I don't know if I want to do that while not having the third kid and or the what's it called? The 3-drop Bardo in the list, right? Or like maybe flip my Ezo count so I can have like extra supernovas. I mean, like sometimes you just happen to whiff. When I was streaming yesterday, I hit 3 Dopies and 2 Hodies on a Bonney, and I was like, excuse me, what are we doing?
Yeah,
but that's fair.
60% of my deck is hits.
I don't mind Bonney.
Yeah. Makes a ton of sense. I just noticed when I played this deck, a lot of matchups kind of boil around drawing 1 or 2 Basil Hawkins, and I kind of wanted to have extra searchers for it. But yeah, I understand the qualms with it. Sometimes it just doesn't find anything, and having extra bricks can be very painful.
Absolutely. And then the fact that you can grab it off of Bonney is fine. Mm-hmm. Like Bonney grabs Supernova cards, you're like, all right, sweet. But in general, the whole like if I just see 2 Basils as matchups free is pretty much what I'm saying every other like game. Is I'm like, oh, it's a Nell. I have a card with barrier. Let me go grab that card with barrier and just like, please draw it. And I take it out of life and I'm like, let's go Basil.
Yeah. Yeah, he's either like the best card. Like, I mean, this reminded me of like the 5-cost Basil that came out from Star Deck 1, right? Like sometimes it was like so expensive to give up your entire turn to play it, but man, if it was on the board, that was a stupid good card. Being able to attack twice into something that's already rested, or invalidate the fact that they have blockers, and it's the feel that this card is like equally obnoxious for different reasons. Makes it, I don't know, it's just really nice to see that Basil Hawkins is so good.
And that's again why it's so hard to play this deck once you get to 6 Dawn, is because you're like, all right, Basil on 6, this card on 8, do this one next, when sometimes your win condition is just double Basil, and without experience with the deck or without a lot of knowledge of the meta, you wouldn't be able to understand and recognize that win condition. Outside of like Lucci, I can't pop Basil. Obviously, I'm going to play a second one into play. And then if your opponent like plan for it and they played a Brook down last turn, and then they lower everything on the board and then swing with Brook, and now you have nothing to tap, and they kill your Basil with it. I was like, all right, well that's really cool. My opponent thinking about it. Like, there's ways that it feels so broken, and then sometimes I'm like, you know what? They could just play a
finger guns,
like
or
I don't know, the seven cost event in blue, like bot text everything.
Oh, gravity blade.
Yeah. They could just be like, all right, swing, blade, go ahead. I'm like, you know what? Maybe Basil's like not. Like, maybe it's fine card.
Basil's washed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's and that's what I was saying. Like at least this isn't a situation where like if you've got like that one guy at your locals that you don't like and he's playing the same deck every week, you can be like, all right, this is their worst matchup. I can build it. I know how to play around it with that. And so if you really hate Basil Hawkins, you can play like Boa and just put a bunch of gravity blades and get rid of it kind of thing. So last thing I was going to say though, I think some people, and this might be like a rule, it's kind of like a rule for Bonney, is that you have to end every turn with one Dawn open, right?
No, absolutely not.
Absolutely not, right? You
would like to.
Yes, yeah.
That's why drawing a Roach feels broken.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I look at my opening hand, I don't have a Bonney, but I have like a Roach, Basil, and then like whatever. I'm like, oh, we're keeping.
Yeah,
like, we're super good here.
Yeah.
You would love to have that scenario, but it's not always necessary. And it only gets that way when they have an established like 6K or higher, like 2 6K or higher units on the board, and you don't have the counter power to deal with what's out there. And then that's just like another skill level of understanding how to pilot the deck, is that you have to plan to use Hody Jones sometimes, and you're on odds, like you need to be able to counter out of earlier swings where you feel like you're overpaying for the swing. So some people go like, 5-check lead in your lead and I'll 2K counter out. And then just because I know I'm going to Hody Jones and I know that my life count is going to be more valuable in the long run than this extra 1K counter power that I'm misvaluing in this situation. And I think a lot of people do the opposite of that, take the hit, because they're like, 8-drop kid, goated. And they just don't really understand that kid's like very vulnerable in this meta. Easily removed by like almost every deck can do it. So
yeah. I mean, but you'll play that one game where you don't find that your opponent doesn't find it, and you're like, oh, I'm invincible. Like this is amazing. And then like I'm gonna do that again. The next game, just 8-drop Katakuri gets it or whatever. So I think that's a really, really good mentality for that one. And again, like I see so many people like, oh, well, I could have played 8-drop kid active this turn or something like that, where I could have played a Basil Hawkins, but I decided to instead play like a Bonney and leave one open, which is kind of worse in the long run kind of thing.
Yeah. Like, I mean, just because Yonas is here and everyone's gonna be here for Enel and all that discussion too. There's so much thinking like, oh, I need to just kid immediately, or I need a Zoro as soon as possible. I have to make them have like the what's it called?
The Rygo. Yeah.
The Rygo, right? The card that pops Zoro.
Yeah, right?
Rygo.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, all right, well, you took the game plan to swing and put them at 2, so you're giving them so much value off the Rygo. like they don't even. It doesn't even think to them. They're just like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna pop and then put pressure on the board, right? And I think when you're able to find turns to navigate 8-drop kid onto the board and then not turn it sideways and put a Dawn on it, you'll realize like how open this deck is for skill expression and or for like ways to like weave how your top end should be played or shouldn't be played against particular matchups and stuff. Because people take the match, like if you go like stall Enel and then they don't take your life in the entire game. I've had this happen to me the first time I played Bonney. I was like, all right, Zoro, pass, and then went draw Yamato, pop your Zoro. Like, and I was like, Russ, you're an idiot, bro. I just all right, man, get me out of here. Like, what a nice swing. Yeah.
It happened.
When you said the card,
it's definitely a deck that like you just need experience, because I'm looking at him like, you can't be hit with Yamato. We're vibing. Yeah. And Yamato came down. I was like, all right, we're not vibing.
When you said the card that pops Zoro, I almost jokingly said Yamato because of situations like that. But that's really, really funny. So. But yeah, we can transition over to talking for some Yellow Enel. Yonas, what's your mentality for Enel in this format, and maybe how it's changed from OP05?
So the hard part about describing Enel is that it gets to choose between being a very aggressive deck and being a very controlling deck, depending a lot on what your hand looks like and what the matchup kind of dictates you should be doing. It's frustrating trying to get into or getting comfortable with the deck because you just don't know if you should be attacking, and it's a lot of matchups if you should be starving, or it's not attacking them at all to deny them resources, or if you should just be trying to attack their board or stuff like that. And it's very nuanced. It just takes a lot of practice to get used to, but it's ultimately just a very controlling deck that tries to use its life as the most powerful resource to draw cards. Where a lot of decks have to counter out of swings, Enel kind of gets to break that rule completely. Going down to 1, going down to 0 a lot of the time, as long as it's in a relatively controlled setting, Enel just does not really care. It gets to kind of recoup that life with Yamato or Ace, or even Katakuri to just try to offset things. And in a lot of matchups, you're just trying to control the board because of Enel's leader ability. Since it says that whenever you would take a life down to 0, you gain 1 life. In a lot of situations when your opponent only has 1 character, it's almost impossible for them to kill you without having an additional character with Rush. Which is one of the most miserable experiences to play against, as I've been on the RP loss side of this matchup, and when you don't have a Kitten Killer on a critical turn, you're just like, let's try to move on. But this deck's super versatile, and there's a lot of things that this deck has been trying to do to solve some relatively problematic matchups. One of the matchups that kind of gave me a lot of grief when I first started playing 07 was the Lucci matchup. This deck just relies on a bunch of relatively tall characters with a lot of vulnerabilities to KO. So I needed some way to address that matchup, because we cannot be the controlling deck based on like how easy it is for them to just set up Tempest Kicks and Sabos and Morias and stuff like that. So we kind of need to find some sort of tempo or aggressive slant, and that's where I ended towards on 7 Enel. That card almost single-handedly makes the entire dynamic of the matchup not fun. Putting it down before they get to play their first 8 cost kind of puts them in a very perilous position very quickly. And now all of a sudden they have to decide whether they have time to play an Isho if they're all of a sudden at 3 life and they're about to be at 2 after the swing. And even when they try to KO with like a Mori or something, thankfully they don't have any Monkey D. Luffy's in their deck, so this guy's staying for a couple extra turns. And you get to end games where you really shouldn't have been able to grind through a bunch of Sabos, Rebekahs, and Morias otherwise. So I think this card kind of flips the matchup on its head, where they're no longer just KOing things like with a bunch of time. They now all of a sudden have to keep up with the racing situation that we have.
Now you can't play your own 5-cost Luffy, right? So you gotta be careful in that one, right?
When he's in play, he is trashed immediately.
Yeah, he is an event card with a counter, right? Like that is the mentality of that card. Yeah.
He is just an event card with counter, and we love event cards with counter in this deck.
We do.
Compared to Bonney, the Bonney deck that Russell was showing earlier had plenty of non-counters. I think this deck might eke out a little bit in terms of non-counters. But that's just largely a product of the fact that we have a few more 0-cost events, and also our leader ability can help us kind of get rid of extra cards without counter that are not as applicable. So we get to play a lot more, and we're countering a lot less. So that definitely helps this aspect of the matchup or this deck.
Yeah. Real quick. So luckily the deck builder on eggmanevents.com, we do have this little bar here. So it looks like you're playing exactly 23 non-counter cards, and Russell, you're only playing 21. So that is correct. You got it. You got room for 2 more. And if we're being pedantic about it, though, you've got 2 copies of this 0-cost one that technically has counter, and you're playing 4. So I'm actually going to call it a tie, because these cards have 2K counter.
It is even. Yeah.
I'm going to call it
fine.
I'm going to call it less because he gets to play Raigo and Benji.
Yeah.
When you hit those out of life, that is not the same thing as hitting in a poo.
Yes, that's true.
Speaking of triggers, this deck is probably the cockroach of this format in terms of how resilient it is. This deck does just not die. But I'm not entirely sure. I think people have been grieving for years, or almost over a year at this point, over dying to Beiji or a Maru or 0-cost event. People are so frustrated when they have to go for lethal, and then Yellow kind of trivially just goes, "Oh, my life is this card that gains me another life." It's so hard to kill this deck without trying to get as many resources out of the deck as possible. And a lot of decks try to adapt either a starve strategy against the Enel, where they just try to not to attack it for a while, or they just try to rush them down a bunch. Additionally, you can always attack their characters, because when it's character on character violence, it's all fair game in terms of card advantage.
Sure.
So I think Bonney's main aspect to win this matchup is just try to bully a lot of the characters. and just get a lot of cards out of me that way. Or just like keep attacking my life plenty of times until they put me in a relatively low spot, and then play the Bane of Yellow's existence 9-cost Zoro.
Yeah.
that card is a menace against this deck.
Yeah, outside of maybe like a 4-cost pudding, right? That card is very tough at times.
Listen, yeah, the Enel deck has 2 vices.
Yes.
It's black decks and blue decks. And definitely putting single-handedly can win a lot of matchups if you're not prepared as the Enel player. And the 7-cost Enel also kind of helps a lot in the aspect of playing against that matchup. The more aggressive leading you are, the less that your pudding is going to matter, because you're still going to be countering defending your Enel to make sure that your characters end up living. So you can at least have that going for you as well. And a couple of new cards I wanted to talk about that are in the deck, aside from the new Luffy. The Egg Luffy is very good in a lot of decks in this deck. 10 Ace is the actual reason why this deck is popular all of a sudden.
Yeah.
In 06, this deck was almost unplayably bad. I rest in peace the guys who were trying to play Enel. But Ace is, alongside Enel, one of the main ways for this deck to just turn the corner and just go from being a very controlling deck to have you dead in 2 turns, kind of like Russell's goal with Hody Jones. This card is so egregious, having an extra way to gain life aside from Yamato, and also have Rush to make sure your opponent's board is contested. A lot of people hate losing to this card, and all of a sudden, when your opponent just plays 3 of them, feels like there's no way to win.
No.
I've seen many screenshots of just someone having 4, and the game is just so over. And that card's super good. Aside from that, I haven't really tested much, or there's cards from EB, but I haven't really played it since, is Shirahoshi. The Shirahoshi blocker has a bunch of niche applications. This deck sometimes falls into the trap where it has to counter out of potential small 5k swings at leader because of the potential like very large swings with like a 9-cost Moria or stuff like that. Or if you're playing against Black Yellow Luffy, the leader is going to be an 11k immediately afterwards. So having this kind of safety valve where you get to just have this blocker that's like nigh invincible a lot of the time can just win you a lot of games. Against Lucci, it can be pretty nice just like have an extra block for like a Moria or something. And against Black Yellow, like no one's playing a Maru anymore. So this card is just going to get a block on a 5 or on the leader Luffy. Just make sure you can block an 11k swing with only 1 card. So aside from that, this deck has been destroying a lot of my testing group. This deck is just like super fun. And again, this deck's very complicated to play. Sometimes you're aggressive, sometimes you're not. And you kind of have to waft between playing a 7 Enel, put him down to 2, and sometimes you have to play a Kata to put their Isho back in life and put him back down to 3, or put him back up to 3. It just depends a lot on the board state, a lot on what your objective is in the short term in order to get the most amount of cards out of your opponent.
Yeah, and I would also say I think my experience is that people haven't adjusted or haven't recalled how to play against this deck at times, and there's a lot of like tiny steps that your opponent's not realizing they just gave you free advantage kind of thing, right?
100%.
And so I think that's going to get diminished by the end of this format where people kind of figure out how to play against this, but that's why I put it as number 1 for me, at least into the format, was because I was playing against just a lot of people who, again, they keep hitting me from 2 to 1. Cool, great, another draw from Yamato, another draw from Ace kind of stuff, and not really playing around the stuff that I could be playing into next turn, and that's again just gave me so much free advantage.
100%. I think a lot of people in the Japan and Southeast Asia region have kind of described the Enel as like a skill check deck, where as long as you have a lot of comfort in understanding how and when to attack with this deck, or against this deck, you can get a lot of extra cards out of Enel. And the more you've played against it, the more you find these spots. And the more you've played Enel, the more you kind of understand the choke points with the deck as well. So at the very least, try this deck out to at least understand your enemy a little bit better if you're a hater of the yellow decks. But at the very least, this deck, even when your opponent really understands how to play against you, there's a bunch of spots to gain a lot of equity and card advantage because of how powerful your lead ability can be.
Yeah. I don't understand how people get anti-yellow frustrated against Enel when Kata burned our life for free with 10-drop Big Mom. I love playing against Enels. I love the concept of like the skill check. I do believe it's a skill check deck. But the fact that you run 7-drop Enel gives you your own agency to change game plans that your opponents used to or not used to. The more I see people playing the 7-drop, that's 7/9, the 1K vanilla.
Compote, yeah.
Whatever. I was like, I don't like that. You don't need the board presence in that fashion. Having an Enel check a body on board for more card advantage when you like just checked it outright with, I don't know, Gadatsu and then Enel, where you're like, all right, 5-on-5 and then like 6-on-6 or like 6-on-5, and then you take 2 cards from their hand, then you drop an Enel in, and they thought you were gonna have a rather unproductive turn. At odd level dawn is just fantastic. Also, I don't understand why people get frustrated when their opponent's like, wow, you guys had another heal card, and I was like, yeah, they have 12.
Yeah.
like we're here all night.
Yeah.
And I don't think people understand that, like, you're not closing early, and if you are, they probably ran into like quite amount of variance from their very consistent deck list, like that runs into that fashion, like that get to that point, right?
I only get frustrated when I see like the 4th copy of Yamato. Like that, I'm like, all right, fine, whatever, that's fine. Like 2 or 3 copies, understood. I knew this going into it. The 4th copy, all right, now this is too much. Like
I kind of vibe with him.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey man, I've seen Hoda Jones before. I get it. I've been there. And I think one of the biggest things I wanted to highlight is like the fact that you play that. This has happened in our locals 5 times already. I've seen Lucci players deck out Enels left and right. And I'm like, what happened? And they're like, well, all he just kept doing was like Rebecca Saba, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, and it never occurred to you to swing at him? Like, all right, card advantage is not the time. Take his life. Go hit him. Like do something. And then just they're like, oh, well, like, yeah, it was just too late by that point. I was like, what was that point? Your 17th heal card? Mm-hmm. Like, was it like your third Yamato after you already played 3 aces? Like you need to be able to get out of that small little range. And yeah, I think like I agree it's a skill check deck. I do not give this deck all that much credit. Yonas, I think you just gap people from understanding board states and understanding +1 -1 advantages. No disrespect to your testing group at all, because Enel can just do Enel things. But yeah, like I don't know. This deck is good. It is in the top 5. But
what? You're 5 out of 5. Is that what you're saying?
I play Bonney. Actually, like if I play Boa or like some other color that's like probably more like that's going to get hurt by it, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do play like putting in Boa, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think deck's fine. I think it has tons of agency because you play the Enel and because you play the Luffy's.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I can't recommend more. I definitely would play Onami. I don't know how people don't. That card's broken.
Yeah.
It's beaten me so many times, and I'm over here like trashing the deck, and I'm like, oh, Onami, my like
your Cavendish.
I'm like, yeah, you got me. Like, I'm really, I needed that Dawn. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, well, with Onami and with Raigo and Luffy, you got 10 cards that pop a 4 or less, right? And Borsalino is like super present right now, right? So like hitting that off the trigger is super good. And I was playing 2 for a while after like I got bullied when I was playing 2, like, why there's so many better cards to play, and or like some people were telling like you don't need to play Sphere Hoshi anymore. It's not that good. Like, no, that's
crazy.
It's very good.
Is fire.
It's when you have like no actual search. This card is one of the MVPs for the deck for sure. So
people call it the most consistent deck for a reason. Mm-hmm. Sure, Hoshi's a main core of that.
Yeah. So I think this deck is obnoxious. I think if you want to beat this deck, you can definitely make sure that you have an option for it. And I think it really is like when you lose against the Nell, a lot of the time, it's not 100% clear why or how. You remember the one beige you hit out of life, and that will be the one point where you're like, oh, that's why I lost. But it was more of there's a lot of times if you step back, you're like, well, you let them draw like 2 extra cards because you kept hitting them down to 1, and then their Yamato drew an extra card by healing or something like that. And giving people, it's hard to look at the matchup unless you watch the entire thing. And every matchup for now is like 20 minutes, right? So that's a time commitment too.
100%.
So
I think there's like the like people will go in with game plans against you,
Mm-hmm.
of like starving, and then all of a sudden you enter a board fight. They exit that game plan, start going for life, and they weave back and forth. I think one of the biggest things from like a good player's perspective is that you constantly shift between board and for life depending on like how you're fighting over the resources of hand and counter power. And I think people don't they again assign that rule, like this is how I must play the matchup. I must play it this way. And Enel players are allowed to be adaptive because of their lead ability to like what's going on. They're like, oh, you're just gonna keep going on my board the whole time. All right, yeah, this is super chill. Watch this, and then they get to like clear board and on one life, and then they look at you because they know your deck doesn't have any rush, and you have one body on board, and you're like, yeah, I'm not dying. So like this is not the appropriate way to go between the two. So I think being a player that goes from like, all right, well here's how we're initially gonna take the early turns, and then we're gonna shift back and forth between board, life, 5-check life, 5-check this, and like going back and forth, and or like maybe this is a turn I don't turn any of my board sideways because I know double ace is about to jump on my board. I need these swings to start coming to life more, and I think people don't adapt in that fashion. Like that's like more of the skill check, the adaptations to how the game's progressing based upon what is being played to the board outside of the macro that which we have going into it, that like leads into more or less skillful interaction with the deck.
Yeah, I would agree. God. Speaking of like, we talked a little bit before about drawing 4 Yamatos, and like the frustration that people have with this deck. I just want to go back to it. It's so funny. Whenever I like play a Shirahoshi and like I discard a Yamato, and then like 3 turns later I've played 4 Yamatos, people are just like, "Oh, you're so lucky." And I'm just like, "Why do you think I discarded one like 3 turns ago?"
Yeah. Like there are telltale signs, right? And that's the other thing. Like, and the other kind of advice I give people is like, don't attack into life if there's a trigger that you're not prepared to hit into. Yeah, the odds are tiny sometimes, but like being able to give them like a free Frankie body, like that could give like a rush card for game and that kind of thing. But on the other side, if you're too pensive and you never go for game, like Enel will eventually win too. So you have to be like, this is the point. If they have this in their life, we lose. We take that gamble. But knowing like what you lose against and what you win against when you're going into those situations, just kind of help you at least say, okay, this is the mentality. This is the gamble that I'm making, and I lost it, but that's okay because I knew that going into it, kind of thing. I don't know. I as long as I can understand why I lose, I take losing a little bit easier, I guess.
It's like intent and like strategic logic behind every swing into the matchup. Like I'm swinging here for this purpose to do this, and I'm either trying to extract a card or I'm allowing this potential cycle to come up because I have a game plan for it. And I think so many people are just using to turn their card sideways.
They are.
That they're just like, all right, now I swing again. Man, all right, Badgie's broken. Like clearly, clearly, why did for this card, man? All right, whatever, man. And then rage quit out, and it's like, the deck's good, but it's not oppressive. Like, it's not soccer, baby. Like the card got banned for a reason.
So, well, cool. Anything else, Jonas, you want to talk about this before we hastily talk about my OK Rob Lucci list?
One last card that's new, I guess, that I want to talk about real quickly is just Kingdom Come. I call it Raigo because the translation that came out.
I prefer that too, but yeah.
Before, I'm not sure many people played Enel in 05, but this deck could never beat a 9-cost or a 10-cost ever beforehand. Like a 10-cost Kaido was drawing 4 cards and staying there. So this deck just like seemingly having just a functional Gum Gum Red Rock in its deck gives it a lot more flexibility to play a more controlling game, where before, if a thing stuck, it stuck for good. And now we have a lot of ways to beat these like 10-cost Kaidos or these 10-cost Dofis that end up being chained. You still have a lot of flexibility in that capacity.
Yeah, and like you would, I mean, not that it really came up, but like, 9-cost Zoro being able to just get hit by Raigos is really big. It's a counter for the deck, but at least you have an out for it that you can hold on to, and that's another potential. So,
yep, they're definitely taxed, and I definitely won't draw as many Raigos as my opponent draws Zoro sometimes, but that's a price we're willing to pay.
All right. Well,
that's all it is about it now.
Yeah, I think, and again, like this, there's a good chance that this list will look different for you personally than what it looks like right now by the release of it. But I think that's kind of the fun. And when you play 10 games and you're like, well, I played a little bit more against this archetype and this card was bad against it, you make that adjustment. again, the fluidity of deck lists right now is intimidating but rewarding at the same time. So cool. All right. Well, let's go talking about fluidity. We've got this one, and so I think Rob Lucci is really open for a lot. I played a lot of Rob Lucci in OPO3 on the original leader, and I really think that kind of back then the leader was really about kind of getting that pressure and value. It was a deck where you could break kind of rules, right, with being able to have your leader attack twice sometimes, or like Borsalino, you would attack with that card, and there's like being able to identify like, well, I was probably going to block with my Borsalino that last turn anyways, so I'm going to block with it early and attack with it now, kind of thing. And so I've always kind of liked that mentality, and I think Black was really good with that. It kind of got off-shifted with Sakazuki and OPO5 and OPO6 when it was just like the removal deck, and I think the leader itself still kind of rewards that kind of mentality, but I do think that it's a deck that, since you put a lot, like the key point for me, like a lot of people see you get the -1 for free, right? That's what a lot of people see. I see more of the trashing 2 cards in the deck, and by using that for a functionality to find more pieces, be like a search condition in yourself, I think is really interesting. Especially, I mean, like 8-drop Moria plays cards from trash, so if you're able to set up your trash more, that's really good. And that's kind of why I've kind of landed up on this one. It's more slated for just grindier matchups, and that's why we play Hogback, where this can find an 8-drop Moria and put it back into your hand, right? So there's a lot of mirror matches where I find, and I've tested, where if you play more 8-drop Morias, you win the game, and so this can get 2 more copies of it. You can mill it early game, and you can like there's even some times where like if you go on curve, generally your first Moria is your worst one, right? Because you don't really have anything on the other board to remove. But if your Moria is you play it to play Hogback to get another Moria later, it's really good all of a sudden. So that's kind of what I want to generally do with this deck. Just have a lot of flexibility for my plays. Get my Morias out. We're playing Sabos, which I still don't know what the proper top end for this deck. I like this is good against Red Purple Law. Obviously, you can get rid of like a kid and something else, right? And there are some times where you need to put a card in your trash so you can play it back later, like your 4-cost Rob Lucci that can be stuck in hand sometimes. But I know some people have been playing Isho, which I think that card's fine, but there's just some weird. There's just like a lot of times where I don't. Either my opponent plays around it, so me playing Isho is kind of worthless. Just the card, the fact that card exists is kind of there. Or I like Rob Lucci is probably like the most aggressive cost reduction deck I've seen. I don't play Ice or the Ice Wall. Not Ice Wall, geez, Ice Age.
Ice Age.
Yeah, sorry, we were talking Ice Wall earlier, but 3 copies of Innis Lobby and the Tempest Kick has just been fine for me as is, which has been really good. I think you get just so much inherent cost reduction that it doesn't really matter to play those in this deck specifically. But that's also like why I like the Perona, because it's a 2K, but it can help you in grinder matchups. You just play this out. It's another target for your 8-drop Moria. It's a 2K, so it's never the worst card. And like some people play like the Kaku to get like the cost reduction, but the cost reduction off the Kaku is actually really, really expensive because the expense is making it so they have to bottom deck, I think, 2 or 3 copies of the Cypher Pool cards. I think it's 3. I think it actually is 3, which is kind of expensive. Let me double check real quick.
I thought it was 2, but you never know.
It's 2, right?
It might be 2. Okay, it is 2, including Cypher Pool. Okay.
Let's go, Kaku. Get in here, baby.
But it is kind of expensive, right? In the sense that because Spandine has to bottom deck 3, right? So if you want that, like, you really have to. If you use your Kaku, then it means that you're not playing Spandine for a long time. And it's lobby being a world government instead of Cypher Pool. Yeah, I know it makes sense, but like it's really obnoxious that it's not Cypher Pool too. So and then also your actual 5-drop Kaku needs to be specifically Cypher Pool card. So I just found that there's so many ways where like having the Kaku, I would have not have been able to use its effect efficiently anyways. So this was nice. And sometimes you play Hogback and you can draw a 2K, and that's pretty nice. So that's just the mentality. We get a lot of value. I think Brooke Rebecca is stupid good in Rob Lucci because if you have an Is Lobby set up, you get rid of a 4-cost like immediately, which is really, really nice. We already know like the Spandine combo. And if anything, like I think I could get like even greedier on the top end if I wanted to like take Sabo out and maybe put 10 cost Lucci, or not Lucci, Kuzan. But we're staying with the Sabo right now, but because we can also play the Stasi. I know a lot of people like 1 or 2 copies of the Stasi, but I like the general framework for this. I could change a couple cards with it too, but I think, and because I know some people do like the 50-50 with Cypherpole and Navy, which I think makes a lot of sense because the brand new also mills cards. But I don't know. I think Rob Lucci is kind of like, you get so much potential value and tempo in a lot of plays that you can get really greedy with builds like this, or how long you really want the game to go.
That makes sense. One thing I've noticed is how few like CP cards there are in this deck compared to a traditional one.
Yeah.
And I'm just worried about spandom a little bit, just like my first blush. But
yeah.
I think there's still plenty of them, so you'll hit a fair amount of the time. But I think sometimes you'll just whiff, which is it's just fine in this deck. You're gonna have so much card advantage with Hogback and Moria. You can just recoup it later. And having 3 cards in your trash is also not bad. So
yeah, not for obviously the draw for spandom, and I mean, she and I played Rob Lucci in OPO3 where we play spandom in brand new, and we would just be like, all right. Our brand news are only going to find Cypherpole cards, and and vice versa. But at least in this deck, even if you do whiff, it still benefits enough where half the cards that are in this deck, I want in trash anyways, right? I want my Subarus and Helmeppos in there on anyways, Spandines, any of my Cypherpole cards. Like, obviously I want Brook in there. So like, even if I whiff, the cards that I whiff with, most of the cards I want in trash in the first place. So I don't know if I'm just coping when I say that, but that's the trade that I go off for that one. So
I don't like the Hogback.
That's totally fine. I know you wouldn't, and that's okay. You don't think Enel's the best deck in the format, so that's fine. We already have this crossroads.
Yeah. I think they're the perfect top end. Outside of, I would play Isho because I'm. You
like Isho. Like, you're playing Isho in OPO6, so I get it.
Yeah. I'm also a Bonney player, and I'm aware of how much that hurts Bonney.
Yeah.
Like, if they steal second and then they drop an Isho on me, I'm like, please stop this madness. I really, really like the finger gun. The Shigen? Yeah, Shigen.
Yeah, the EVO 1/1.
Yeah. Let me see. Yeah. Finger pistol.
Yeah. I want a better matchup in a Bonney. I think Bonney will be influenced more so throughout the store tournaments. That I really just like card available to me, and I think that like at times the 4 that you would pay to get your haul back into play, might be more scenarios where you're just like, yeah, I just want a finger pistol and like get a removal here and then sit alongside like a Sabo for the turn. But I think differently than you when it comes to Moria. So like while like spamming Morias on each other is like obviously like a great way to win the game.
Yeah.
Because like cards are broken, right? I mean, I've played so many black games where I'm like, oh, they saw Moria and I didn't. I'm now like navigating my way to find a win condition through like my 4/6s on my board. And I think that's like another reason why I like Khalifa is because I like being able to play something on the board, gives me immediate value, and then to threaten the option of like, oh, 1 Daunt on it, swing life, and now I can potentially create a lethal out of nowhere or absorb a resource for like just 1 Daunt attachment, which is like perfectly fine with me. And then to swing at a Khalifa the following turn feels terrible for the opponent.
Yeah.
Because they're like this is just like, it's not what I want to be doing. It's the same feeling like when you Rebecca Brook and then they don't have a way to immediately pop Rebecca. It feels terrible because you're just like, all right, well, I have to deal with this Brook the following turn, or I can swing my leader into the Brook and get 2K countered out, and or like just trying to force a Rebecca resource this turn. I think I've just played a lot more aggressively, but I love the Sabo count. I don't think anyone should be running less than 3 Sabo. I do not support Stussy at all. I think for a deck that can manage so many 2-for-1s or 3-for-1s in like one scenario, like because you got like +1 off of your span or whatever when you're doing like a Lucci play or whatever. To like concede all that to go for a 1-for-1 just to get my like a 9K body on board is not enough for me. like that's not enough for me to want to play the card. For removal.
I was on the same on Stasi, like, and it's really tough because it's searchable, right? Like there are reasons. Like there are some times I think this meta if you just don't see your top, there are so many games that become non-games if you don't see anything that costs more than a 5, right? And there's a lot of decks that get hit by that. I don't think any of the builds are going to be guilty of that because you guys, again, 23 non-counter cards on each one of these. But
no, but like I support that mentality, which is why I'm like, keep what you got here, and then I would also just add in the issues, right? I want that board value, and I want like the presence that I want to be able to hit a top end card when I absolutely need it, which is what turn 3-4. So like, and I don't think Stussies that card I want to hit. like it's just like, hey, keep your card on board. I don't care. Like I don't need to remove every single body I ever see. Like we'll just start swinging and then get more value of our cards swing sideways. And I think since I have that mentality, I'm that's why I'm like not on Hogback, but I get it.
Yeah.
I also really like expanding off of Rebecca. When I was testing Lucci, I thought Spanding had to sacrifice itself. I thought you tributed Spanding and then you played in Lucci.
I mean, I do that half the time, but yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, this board's so wide. Why? like I can potentially just threaten lethal for no reason. So I like at least 2 in most of my lists, but it's hard to concede so many spots when you're going for your prone idea with the Hogback.
Yeah, so. Yeah.
Just one.
That's wild.
Just one. That's all you need.
Yeah, if you see it, you're done. Like you only need to see one, so you're fine.
Yeah.
But again, like that's like why I wanted to be like, okay, like, and it's, if I go back to Moria, it might be the same thing where like there are just so many good cards that like do double value when they're in the trash now that you can really just double down on the idea of like a self mill deck to get more resources and get to so much tempo or advantage from it. So Rob Lucci is just my idea for that. I think Hogback was it was a joke and then it worked better than expected, which I know is a low bar at the time, but I think it's something that is neat. And if you're, because I've seen like, again, like I watch so many games of One Piece. I've seen so many ding dang deck lists, and again, like it sucks to be so reductive at times too, but it really is just like, wow, that person did play 2 Marios, huh? I guess they won. And it's unironically, it happens like that so often. So which I think a lot of people are pegging probably correctly that Moria is going to get hit, but like when it's still at 4, I'm going to still try to play it 4 times in one game kind of thing. So and I think being able to recycle it in some way does get some value, and worst case it's just a 1K. It's not like a whole engine. It's an extra 5 cards into a deck. So that's why I've been testing it and why I've been moderately happy with it too. So
not to venture into like make believe land.
Sure.
Just leader lock Rebecca and Moria, and I don't care anymore. No. Like just leader lock Rebecca to Rebecca and leader lock Moria to Moria, and I'm vibing.
Sure.
I think everything's phenomenal the way it needs to be. Just like I want to leader lock RP Law stuff. I think Red Purple Law deserves to be a card. I really hope they don't ban that leader. I just think that some of the cards that they're playing with it is not intended the way it needs to be. So I would like to see more leader lock cards. And this is crazy because I like yellow is the most unleader lock thing I've ever seen. Like, you get to play like Katakuri, Yamato, Ace, and it's like none of them need to be. Like,
hey, at least they leader lock the 10 drop. Can you imagine where we?
Yeah, come on.
I mean, sure, they gave a Big Mom Pirate ramp, but like, yeah, I will say, I think like there's just so many. I've seen so many Band-Aid card games at this point where I can tell where they're like, all right, we're printing a card like this where we're going to be testing an idea. And then it's like, cool, it worked. We're going to be doing this idea moving forward kind of stuff. And so I think having Cavendish with a good ability, but like nothing like super crazy, but still having it leader locked in a game that very rarely leader locks cards might indicate that they are leaning more towards doing that. And I think that's totally fine. I think Moria in Moria the leader is totally fine. I think Rebecca in a Dressrosa leader might mean that Kyros gets some more play, which I'm all about. So that kind of stuff, I think I'd be really curious on their mentality, and if erratas for cards for functionally neutering them or adjusting their power level will exist the next little bit.
Yep. I think it'd be just fun that way. I don't like cards getting super banned when, like, in my opinion, there's a viable way for them to stick with their intended design, which is just leader lock to Moria and get me out of this game.
Yeah.
Anecdotally, has Bandai ever like buffed cards by removing restrictions?
Not really. I
Okay.
in any of the games that I play, which is essentially Dragon Ball Super, now Masters, Digimon Fusion, BSS, any changes have been to remove their power level, which I think makes sense. I've done some digital card games and they've buffed cards because it's easy to do that. And so if there's like times where I don't know, like eroding paper cards is just really tough to do, and there's always the risk that Jimmy opens a pack, doesn't realize a card is banned or doesn't work that way anymore, and that's frustrating. I think at like a more casual level trying to get into the game.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I'm scared they're not going to do it because they have the reprint site coming, and they showed us the Moria, and I'm like, I don't think those two are at all, like, coincide or like a handshake agreement that they're not going to do that for that reason. However,
yeah,
we'll see.
There have been so many times though where something gets like a promo reprint that gets like banned, like Digimon, like Mega Digimon Fusion, like they got like the national championship promos or whatever, and it was like banned like the next day. Like it was publicly banned before. I think people.
That's fire.
Yeah, and
that's cool.
It happens. It happens quite a bit where people are like, because they're like, oh yeah, we want to reprint the popular cards, right? And then like, man, this card's too popular, huh? So because it happened in Fusion World, One Drop Roshi. There's 3 different prints of that card already. There's only 2 sets for this game. They've printed 3 different sets or versions of that card. They're banned. It's gone 5 days ago.
That card's broken though.
Yeah, it is broken. Yeah, 100%.
Gar got banned for a reason.
But they're like, oh yeah, this card's cool. We're gonna print another one because it's a staple. And then they're like, oh, now we see why it's a staple. So, per usual, I'm very bad at time management. We are like an hour and 20. So if you made it to this far into the video, we really do appreciate it. I know we're just rambling on this kind of stuff, but hopefully enough content until we do another one, probably next month, maybe around Gen Con, maybe before the Dallas Championship too. Since I think we'll have OPO8 before the September event, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
We will?
When is
I think it's the end of September.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So maybe
so I think it's like
one.
Matt's then 08.
Which is fire.
That's fine. Yes. Because again, like this is still like, I think a format which it won't get a lot of large scale tournaments. So I think that's still really, really interesting. So
I just really, really hope whatever restrictions they make, they give us it on release. I think them telling us that Sakazuki's broken and needs to get banned, and so is Reject, but enjoy 2.5 more months of that really, really hurt the soul. Because it's like, please, I know you guys went through it. I'm so sorry, but don't do this to us for RP Law.
Yeah.
Like, give us a really cool OPO8 meta. But
yeah, we got, yeah, I really wish it was hit an EBO one, and I feel like I've said that 100 times by now, but hopefully we get, like, because, like, originally we complained too much, and so they gave us our own format, and that was bad. And then we didn't complain enough or something, and so we are on the same track of them, right? So hopefully there's like a middle ground where they recognize when is the right time to make these changes, and we'll see if that happens with whatever happens in August too. So anything else from you guys though before we close it out?
Nothing. I'm going to do my best to convince Russell that Enel's great.
Oh, cool.
So other than that,
yeah. Well, maybe I'll have to have you do like a fight. We'll maybe do like a night.
That's a small sample size.
Okay.
So, like that's why, like, I jokingly make arguments.
Yeah.
People are like, all right, like, players amazing, but I'm like, yo, I'm 3-0 against them. I don't care.
No.
Free. Like, does that make any sense? No. Like it's just a small, like, little, like minuscule. What were the matchups? How do people draw and stuff like that? But yeah, it's just like what I don't like what it offers as a deck.
Sure.
As opposed to what I otherwise could be playing. But I would play it 20 out of 20 times over Black Yellow Luffy.
Okay.
Because the frustration. All right, I get more mad playing against Black Yellow Luffy than I do Enel.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand how people don't feel the same way. When they like double Sabo for your turn, and I'm just like, yeah, okay. Like, your whole board has barrier. I cannot interact with anything going on.
You got Hody. You got Hody.
At least we're countering. At least fine.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, like
Yeah.
that's why I like Corona,
Mhm.
because you just Isho and you tap a Sabo
Mhm.
and you laugh at him.
Yeah.
And you beat him.
Yeah.
Free all day.
100%. Well, I will say, like, to end that little anecdote too, of like, oh yeah, well, fight me. Like, my defense is always like, well, I said a good player shouldn't lose to Enel. That's not me. That's you can beat me every day. You're proving nothing. All right, you said a good player. There's not one in my house right now. So
I'll let you know when people come by.
yeah, I'll let you know when Yomi comes home. Yeah. So, anyways, this is a lot of fun. Thank you guys for sticking around. We do appreciate it. Again, if you guys want to check out any of the deck lists that we have, they're going to be on the website. There's a good chance that between recording and then that they'll have some minor changes from what we've seen. But I really appreciate Russell and Yonas taking the time for this too. We'll try to make this a little bit more regular, once a month kind of thing. If there's anything else that you guys want from future one of these, let us know too. But that's going to be it from us. Thank you guys very much, and we'll catch you all next time.